And joining us now is Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, Democrat from New York. Congressman, thanks a lot. I appreciate a few minutes. We were talking yesterday as Connecticut moved forward as a state with their passage of some landmark gun legislation, and what we saw in New York as well. But then it dawned on me, no matter what the polls say, unless I read this thing wrong, it's not going to happen in Washington, or if it happens, at best, we're going to get some version of a background check, and it's probably not going to be universal. First of all, tell me I'm wrong here, but it seems, I don't know how we went from the national tragedy from more than 3 months ago to where we are now.
Well, I don't know what the politics are. I can tell you what I think is right, and I can tell you what I think will save lives. I think there are real steps we can take that are the most popular, that are the most bipartisan, that will actually be the most effective. And so I do believe there is a category of reform, particularly around universal background checks, around federal gun trafficking laws, about better screening of dangerously mentally ill people and keeping guns out of the hands of those people, that both parties can agree on and that will save lives, and we should do it. But I also think it's very important that we have an honest debate about this because, you know, I respect the Second Amendment, and I think that the Supreme Court has told us twice in recent years that people have a constitutionally protected right to own a gun, to protect themselves in their own home, and we should take that seriously, and we shouldn't run roughshod over people's constitutional rights, but we do not need to save lives, and that's the good news. And so I think if we all take a deep breath and talk to each other, we can find common ground that will actually save lives, and that's what I'm focused on.
I know you are, and I know a lot of folks are, but I'm doing the math now. And more than 3 months later, I'm seeing the polls start to ebb a little bit. The public hue and cries died down. Something else happens in. There's an axiom that we use in this business. After 5 weeks, people move on to something else, even as bad as a tragedy is. And you're starting to see it now. Moreover, we saw in the Senate. Harry Reid already said the assault weapons ban is not even going to be in that legislation. So if it's not even going to try to get through the Senate, it's no chance of getting through the House. And it's mind-boggling to me that 90% of Americans will want, let's say, a universal background check. 3/4 of the members of the NRA do, but yet everybody I talk to on and off camera says, I don't know if it's going to get through. Certainly not what we saw in Connecticut, certainly not what we saw in New York. It's probably going to be a watered-down version. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't do the political math that says that's a winner politically. But obviously, I've been wrong on this. I would have thought by now something would have happened, and every day going forward, it looks harder and harder something's going to pass.
I think the most important thing is that we need to reach out to hunters, to sportsmen, to people who collect guns, to people who play by the rules and who are law-abiding citizens. Well, no, listen, I don't think that Democrats have done a good job in the past of saying we take the Second Amendment seriously. We take seriously the Supreme Court rulings that say you've got a right to own a gun in your own home. I grew up in a family of people who own guns. I grew up shooting a .22 rifle. You know, me and my brothers were not going to hurt anybody or commit a crime. And gun owners are not the problem. The problem is that we have guns in the hands of dangerously mentally ill people, that we allow trafficking in guns when we shouldn't, and we don't do effective background checks, and we don't enforce the laws we have. So I think that we need to say very clearly that we are not going to run roughshod over the Second Amendment. And we can build a coalition of people from both parties, of gun owners, of people who know that we can save lives if we listen to each other and work together. The problem is that you have real extremists on both sides, but mostly in the NRA, that won't even have a conversation about something like universal background checks. So I think the NRA has become so extreme as to become useless in this debate where serious people are trying to balance our respect for the Second Amendment and legitimate gun ownership, law-abiding gun owners who are not the problem, and respecting those rights. And I mean that seriously. With efforts that will save lives, that will prevent some of these mass killings and reduce gun violence in America, and we can do that. And I wouldn't give up hope. I think that what you're seeing is that in Washington and elsewhere, people know that we have to act. We have to do something.
I would have said you were right, certainly a week after the shootings in Newtown, that ridiculous press conference that LaPierre had, basically more guns, that's the answer to this. I thought they overplayed their hand, the app that came out. But I want to play a clip from you. This is from a colleague of yours in the House, Louis Gohmert, Republican from Texas. I want you to take a listen, and our audience, to what he had to say about the prospect of more gun regulation and the comparison he made.
Once you make it 10, then why would you draw the line at 10? What's wrong with 9 or 11? And the problem is, once you draw that limit, it's kind of like marriage. When you say it's not a man and a woman anymore, then why not have 3 men and 1 woman, or 4 women and 1 man, and or why not, somebody has a love for an animal.
Okay. Yeah. But before we say this is some crankpot on the farthest edge of the radio dial,
that's funny, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
That's a sitting congressman.
Yeah, it is.
And he was talking, if he didn't get from the beginning, about the ammo clip limits, 10, for example.
Right.
He said,
right.
What I thought most telling about I'll say it, that idiot, what he had to say was, I checked after that statement, he wasn't condemned by a single member of Republican leadership. No one asked him from leadership to go back in front of the cameras and retract it or say that he chose his words poorly. And to me, I read that to say they don't think this political risk or downfall to let the wingnuts of the party go out and in effect speak for them. He had zero in the way of ramifications for those unbelievably moronic statements. Right. So to me, that tells me they've already staked out their political ground, and they're gonna dig in their heels. And obviously, they control the House.
Well, look, you picked a colleague of mine who is, one of the most extreme members in Congress. And if the point is that there are extremists in Congress, you're right, there are. And that's a good example of it. And it's laughable.
But they're not getting slapped down by leadership. That's my point. There's always been idiots, but they didn't get to speak for the party. They're getting to now.
Well, I think the biggest problem we have in Congress right now is that this Tea Party tail is still wagging the dog. And you know this. I beat a member of Congress, Nan Hayworth, just in November, who wanted to end the guaranteed benefit of Medicare and who thought we should give huge tax cuts to multimillionaires, and who was the largest recipient of NRA money in New York. So we've got that kind of extremism right here in the Hudson Valley, and it exists on the floor of the U.S. Congress. And unfortunately, it's in the way of people of good faith doing what I'm talking about, which is saying we take the Second Amendment seriously. If you've got a gun in your house because if some guy comes over the back fence, you want to be safe. And if you're on a sales trip, you want your wife to have access to that gun to protect herself, you got no problem from me. And the Second Amendment protects your right to do that. We should say that. But we should also engage those folks who feel that way, who are members of my own family, and who I totally understand that point of view. We should say there are some things we can do as adults, as reasonable people who want to make progress.
But do you find when the cameras aren't on with C-SPAN, you talk to some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they forget the crackpots or the Gohmerts of the world, that they say, listen, I want to do this, but look what happens, whether at the state level or at the national level, when a Republican takes a position, they're primaried. And then they're looking for employment elsewhere. Is the political risk what's really in the way of this, more so than the ideological, that you could peel off enough votes in the House on the Republican side to at least get universal background checks?
I think so, and I think so. And if you look at things like Violence Against Women Act, where 150 members of the Republican Party voted against it, and yet 85 of them voted with 200 Democrats, and we got it passed because they just couldn't hold it up, because they couldn't defend it. If you look at things like protecting the full faith and credit of the United States, if you look at the Sandy disaster relief bill, these are all things that just happened in the last couple months, since I've been in Congress, that happened with a bipartisan majority, because even the wingnuts in the Tea Party couldn't justify holding it up. We have to make sure that the reform proposals make sense, that they'll save lives, that they respect the Second Amendment. And if we do that, I believe we can get the same sort of coalition. John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, still has to put it on the floor, and to do that, he's got to override, these wingnuts like Louis Gohmert. That member has so little respect for law enforcement. He just got in trouble this week for parking his car in front of the Lincoln Memorial and yelled at a police officer who told him he shouldn't. So those guys are always going to exist, but there are good people in the middle, and we can work this out, but we've got to work together.